They said it was self-defense, but then they erased the crime scene. Jason Corbett, a father of two, an Irish businessman, was found brutally beaten to death in his bedroom in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, in the summer of 2015. His wife, Molly Martens, and her father, a former FBI agent, claimed they had no choice, that they were protecting themselves. But from the very beginning, something felt off. No murder weapon ever fully explained the wounds. No neighbor heard screams, and two critical pieces of evidence, Jason's phone and laptop, simply vanished. This is a case where nothing lines up cleanly, where the official story collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. And when you start to trace those contradictions back to the source, you find not chaos, but control. Tonight, on Cold Radio, we unravel the top 5 most haunting and puzzling mysteries that still surround the death of Jason Corbett. 5 strange details, 5 unanswered questions, and 5 shadows that haven't faded, even a decade later. We'll look at the chilling disappearance of Jason's personal devices, and why that digital silence speaks volumes, the disturbing decision to scrub the home clean before investigators could finish their work, the children's testimony, flipped, twisted, and weaponized, a justice system that convicted, then reversed itself, and a motive that may have been far darker than anyone dared admit. Each of these mysteries doesn't just challenge the facts, they shake our assumptions about truth, family, and justice. Because when you pull at these threads, the fabric of the narrative doesn't just tear, it unravels. And what lies beneath isn't confusion, it's calculation. Because sometimes what looks like chaos is just a well-timed storm. At Cold Radio, we go deeper, beyond headlines, beyond verdicts. We piece together what's been scattered. We ask the questions that still echo in the silence, and we begin with the most immediate mystery of all. Jason's laptop and phone, gone. Not destroyed, not hidden, not recovered. Gone. Why would the only devices that held his final communications disappear? Let's begin there. Top 1. The vanishing devices. Jason Corbett's missing laptop and phone. They weren't broken. They weren't hidden. They were just gone. In the chaos that followed Jason Corbett's violent death, one detail was easy to miss, at first. A missing laptop. A phone that vanished. But as the dust settled and questions began to multiply, that missing detail transformed into something far more chilling. Silence. Because those devices weren't just electronics. They were Jason's voice, his last words, his thoughts, his plans, the trace of who he was and what he feared. And someone made sure that voice would never be heard again. Jason Corbett, a 39-year-old Irish businessman living in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, was found bludgeoned to death in his bedroom on August 2, 2015. His wife, Molly Martens, and her father, former FBI agent Thomas Martens, claimed it was self-defense. That Jason had attacked Molly. That they had no choice. But as investigators arrived at the scene, one question emerged quickly, quietly, like a whisper through the chaos. Where were Jason's personal devices? His laptop was gone. His phone was missing. Neither has ever been recovered. Not found in the house, not found in the trash, not found at all. Let's pause for a moment. Think about how much of your life exists on your phone or your computer. Messages, plans, thoughts, fears, the private blueprints of your world. Jason had reportedly been planning to return to Ireland. He wanted to bring his children with him. There was conflict in the home, and according to friends, family, and even court records, he didn't want Molly to come with them. It's not speculation to believe that his decisions, his reasoning, his desperation could have been documented on those devices. So where are they? Who removed them? Why weren't they collected by police? And why, if Molly and her father had nothing to hide, were Jason's last digital footprints wiped clean? Investigators searched, they asked, they subpoenaed records. Nothing. No pings, no backups, no accidental traces, no trace at all. Now, this isn't just about missing objects. It's about a narrative being stripped of its other half. Because when someone dies violently, the first thing investigators look for is what was happening in their life. Were there threats, fears, Warnings? Had Jason reached out to anyone in those final hours? Was he making plans that someone didn't want him to follow through with? We may never know, because the very evidence that could have answered those questions disappeared. And here's what makes it worse. The Martens' version of events hinged on one narrative: that Jason was dangerous, abusive, that they were reacting to a threat. But without Jason's voice, his emails, texts, journal entries, anything, only their version remains. And that imbalance, it's not just troubling, it's manipulative. It's what many of our viewers would call gaslighting by omission. A story where the only account that survives is the one that benefits the accused, and everything else vanished. One cold radio commenter said it best: "If this was truly self-defense, why erase the man's voice?" We've seen this pattern before: missing cell phones, deleted data, destroyed surveillance footage. In true crime, when evidence disappears, it doesn't just remove facts, it erases accountability. This makes us wonder: did someone take those devices before first responders arrived? Were they removed in a moment of panic, or as part of a plan? And most disturbingly, what might Jason have been trying to say? Because maybe the most haunting thing in this case is what we never got to hear. No last messages, no final confessions, no frightened texts in the dark, just silence. And while the world debated guilt, innocence, and justice in a courtroom, Jason's last messages, whatever they were, never made it to the stand. They were silenced. Deliberately? We don't know, but we do know this. In a case already shrouded in contradictions, the vanishing of Jason's most personal possessions isn't just strange. It's the first crack in a much deeper fracture, and that fracture only grows wider in what comes next. Because after Jason was gone, before any jury saw photos, before any expert gave testimony, something else vanished from that home. Not evidence, but the blood. Let's talk about what happened when the scene was professionally cleaned, before forensics were even finished. Top 2. The sanitized scene. A crime scene cleaned before the investigation. What kind of person calls a professional cleaning service while the blood is still drying? In the aftermath of Jason Corbett's brutal death, most people focused on the what: the blows, the weapons, the stories clashing in court. But in the background, almost unnoticed at first, something else was quietly erased. Not a detail, not a memory, the scene itself. Just days after Jason was bludgeoned to death in his own bedroom, a room soaked in blood, scattered with trauma, the home was professionally cleaned. Walls scrubbed, carpet treated, sheets discarded, all before the forensic team had even finished their work. And it wasn't just cleaned, it was sanitized. Molly Martens, Jason's wife and one of the two people who admitted to taking part in his death, paid over $5,500 for an industrial-grade cleaning service. This wasn't a grieving widow tidying up. This was a full-scale biohazard operation. Before a grand jury had convened, before forensics had completed their reports, before Jason's body was even laid to rest in Irish soil. That timeline alone sends a chill down your spine. Pause and imagine this. You've just lost your husband. Your partner has died, violently, in your home. You claim you acted in self-defense, that you had no choice, that the man you once loved turned into a threat, and that you survived. So why? Would you destroy the very place that could prove you right? This is the contradiction that sits like a splinter at the heart of the case. Because crime scenes speak, they tell truths when people lie. Blood spatter reveals angles, patterns reveal force, positioning tells a story no one else can. And yet, that entire story was washed away. Investigators noticed it. Quickly. They documented the inconsistencies. Some items had been moved, others were missing. Photos taken at the scene no longer matched what they saw during follow-up visits. And when they asked why, there was no legal order, no police authorization, just a decision, made by the accused. Let's be clear. This wasn't a panicked moment with a mop and bucket. This was calculated, a company hired, a payment processed, a service scheduled. At a time when most people would be planning a funeral, Molly Martens was planning a cover-up. One cold radio listener put it bluntly. You don't clean up what you want justice to see. You clean up what you want justice to forget. And what exactly was erased? Blood that could have told how many blows were struck. Trajectory patterns that could confirm if Jason was standing or already down. Spatial data that could have supported or dismantled the claim of self-defense. Gone. All of it. It's not just about evidence lost, it's about the intent behind the erasure. Because Molly didn't act alone that night. Her father, a former FBI agent, was with her, a man trained to understand the importance of crime scenes, of evidence, of procedure. So why didn't he stop it? Unless the goal wasn't to preserve justice, it was to preserve their version of events. That's what makes this moment in the timeline so haunting. Not just what was done, but how soon it was done, as if someone already knew what the police might find. This detail hits a nerve for Cold Radio's audience, and for good reason. We've seen it before in other cases. Scenes altered, footage deleted, timelines manipulated, and every time the same question emerges. If your story is true, why not let the evidence speak? The justice system depends on more than words. It needs data, blood patterns, spatial proof, contradictions exposed by angles and stains. Without it, what's left? Only a story, and the one being told here, of a wife and father defending themselves in a moment of chaos, starts to crumble the moment the bleach hits the floor. So now we're left wondering, was this an impulsive cleanup or a premeditated silencing? And if Molly Martens truly feared for her life, why erase the only thing that could have proven her right? Because here's the hard truth. In true crime, when a scene is altered, it doesn't just hinder an investigation. It shifts the burden of truth, and what was once a home becomes a stage. If these two mysterious details, or anything else in this case, made you pause and think, let us know. A simple like not only supports the channel, but also helps share this story with more people, others who are also searching for answers. Do you have a theory? Did something seem off to you? Share your thoughts, or any other detail, in the comments below. Every insight is a piece of the puzzle, and who knows, maybe you will be the one who helps bring us one step closer to the truth. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's move on to the next mystery. Top 3. The Children's Contradictions, Coached Testimonies and Recanted Truths. They say children don't lie, but what if they were taught to? August 2015. A quiet suburban home becomes a crime scene, and inside that home, two small voices. Jack, 10th, Sarah, just 8th, two children who had just lost their father in the most brutal way imaginable. In the aftermath of Jason Corbett's death, while his body still lay cold in the morgue, authorities turned to the only living witnesses in the house that night, Jack and Sarah. What they said stunned everyone. In their initial interviews with child protection officials, both children described Jason as mean. They said he yelled, that he was rough, that Molly, his second wife, and their stepmother had protected them, that Jason had been hurting her. To detectives, the picture appeared to come together. A violent man, a terrified wife, a father-in-law who stepped in, a family tragedy born of self-defense. But behind those carefully chosen words was something far darker. Because those weren't Jack and Sarah's words. They were Molly's. Months later, something changed. When the children were taken back to Ireland, far from the chaos, far from Molly, far from the lawyers and the pressure and the whispered rehearsals, the mask slipped, and what lay beneath it was devastating. Jack began keeping a journal. Simple, scribbled entries, but each one cut like a blade. He said Molly had told him to lie, that she coached him before every interview, that she warned him, "If you don't say, 'Daddy hurt me,' they'll take me away, and I'll never come back." Sarah echoed that same haunting refrain in private therapy. She admitted it plainly. They were scared. They were manipulated. What they said wasn't true. And just like that, everything flipped. Because these weren't minor discrepancies. These weren't childish confusions. They were confessions. And they shattered the defense's foundation. Let that sink in. The entire story, the defense's moral core, their justification, their plea for sympathy, was built on the testimony of two grieving, vulnerable children. Children who, in their most fragile moment, were used as pawns. To prosecutors, it wasn't just a twist, it was a revelation, because it meant the self-defense narrative was scripted, that the Martens didn't just clean blood from the floors, they rewrote memory itself. And maybe the most chilling part, they almost got away with it. Let's remember something crucial. Jason had refused to let Molly adopt Jack and Sarah. Just days before he was killed, he made it known. He planned to leave for Ireland, with his children, without her. Now ask yourself, was this about fear or control? Was Molly building a long-term custody narrative, a fabricated story of abuse, seeded into the minds of two children, so that one day, when Jason was no longer around, she could claim them as her own? Because if that's true, then the murder wasn't just physical, it was psychological, and it began long before the night Jason took his final breath. Audience reactions to this part of the case have been among the most visceral we've seen. One cold radio commenter said, "When I read what the kids really said later, my blood boiled. That woman used them like shields, like tools. It's not just outrage, it's a collective grief for innocence lost. Because when a child is forced to lie about a parent, when they're coached to betray the only person who ever protected them, the damage doesn't end in court. Years later, Jack and Sarah still carry the scars. In victim impact statements, they spoke of confusion, of guilt, of being made to feel complicit. They described the agony of remembering what they were told to forget, and the long, painful road to reclaiming their own voices. So we ask, how do you measure the cost of a stolen truth? What happens to a child who is taught that love is a lie and loyalty is a weapon? Because when truth is scripted, when memory is manipulated, when children become tools in an adult's battle for control, what's left? Not justice, not healing, only a silence that screams. And this silence may be the most haunting voice in the entire case. Up next, we look at what happened when that voice, the legal voice, the verdict itself, was suddenly reversed. Because even after a conviction was handed down, it didn't stick. Top 4. The Overturned Convictions. How guilty didn't stay guilty. A jury said guilty. A judge gave 20 to 25 years. And then, it all disappeared. In 2017, Molly Martens and her father, Thomas Martens, were convicted of second-degree murder for the brutal killing of Jason Corbett. The case had been difficult, emotionally charged, but the evidence, according to prosecutors, was overwhelming. A blood-soaked baseball bat, repeated blows to the head, a narrative built not on fear, but on power and on control. The jury deliberated. They weighed the facts. And when the verdict was read, it felt, for one brief moment, as if justice had spoken. But justice didn't get the last word. Just 4 years later, in a stunning legal reversal, the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned the convictions. Not because Molly and Thomas didn't kill Jason, that was never in dispute, but because the court believed the jury had been denied crucial context. Allegations of abuse, statements Molly had made to friends and therapists, words that, had they been allowed in, might have made her fear seem more credible. And so, the trial was unraveled. But here's where it gets harder to understand. Rather than face a second jury, rather than return to court and confront the full forensic record again, Molly and Thomas agreed to a plea deal: voluntary manslaughter. With time already served, they were released, from a sentence of up to 25 years to barely 4 behind bars. That's the official version. But what lingers, what haunts, isn't just the legal maneuvering, it's the emotional cost of that reversal. Because to many watching, it didn't feel like justice, it felt like a system folding in on itself. Let's examine what didn't change. The autopsy report still showed Jason had been struck 10 times. His skull had been fractured in multiple places. Blood spatter analysis suggested he may have already been unconscious, perhaps already dying, when the final blows were delivered. This wasn't a sudden outburst, it was devastation, and yet that entire narrative, the story of overkill, of violence beyond necessity, was rebranded. not disproven, just reframed, because the court said Molly hadn't been able to share enough about her fear. And so the foundation of the case cracked, not under new evidence but under the weight of legal structure. It raises a bitter question. What matters more? What happened? Or how it's allowed to be told? The plea deal that followed let them avoid everything a second trial would have demanded: the testimony of Jason's children, the scrutiny of forensic experts, the cross-examination that might have tested their timeline, their intent, their version of fear. And for Jason's family, especially for Jack and Sarah, it was like watching truth dissolve. Imagine this. You take the stand. You testify about the night your father died. You speak about lies you were told to repeat. You do it not once, but twice, in 2 different courtrooms, in 2 different years. And then, after all of that, his killers walk free. One cold radio listener put it bluntly. They confessed. They served 4 years. What message does that send? It's more than a loophole. It's a rupture in belief. Because what's the point of a jury if the verdict can be rewound? What's the meaning of accountability if it expires? This isn't just legal fatigue, it's moral fatigue. A system strained by contradictions, where a brutal death can be classified as manslaughter simply because the first trial wasn't complete. The frustration is real, and it's growing. Tracy Lynch, Jason's sister, who took in Jack and Sarah, has spoken about that pain, about watching her niece and nephew relive trauma only to see the outcome rewritten, and about the quiet fury that comes from knowing the court never said Molly was innocent, just that the process hadn't been perfect. But when the process breaks, what's left for the people who lived through the reality? What do you call justice when the punishment doesn't match the crime? This makes us wonder, was justice served or merely negotiated? And if this outcome was supposed to be closure, why does it feel like another door slammed shut? Because Jason is still gone. His children are still grieving. And the people who killed him are free. And now, we turn to the darkest thread in this story. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a moment of rage at all. Maybe it was something colder, something calculated. Top 5. The chilling motive: custody, control, and $600,000. When someone dies violently, investigators look at opportunity, at access. But above all, they look at motive. And in the death of Jason Corbett, one motive stands above the rest: cold, calculated, and disturbingly plausible. It wasn't just an argument gone too far. It wasn't just a family dispute. It was custody and cash. At the time of his death, Jason Corbett was preparing to return to Ireland. He had made plans. He had packed bags, and, most significantly, he intended to take his 2 children, Jack and Sarah, with him. But one person was not part of those plans: Molly Martens. Jason's second wife, Molly, had never formally adopted the children. Despite being their stepmother for several years, Jason had repeatedly refused to sign adoption papers. According to court testimony, he made it clear the children were his, biologically, legally, and emotionally. He feared Molly's instability. He didn't trust her, and he had told friends and family he wanted to go home to Limerick with Jack and Sarah, alone. Then there's the money, a number that sits heavy in the background of this story. Jason had a life insurance policy worth $600,000. Molly was the named beneficiary. Let's pause there. You have a man who's cutting emotional and legal ties, who's planning to leave the country, who's not including his wife in future plans, who has sole custody of 2 young children, and who is, by the simple act of dying, worth over $500,000 to one person. That's not just a motive, that's a pressure point, one with a ticking clock. From an investigative standpoint, it opens a corridor of unsettling questions. Was Molly afraid of losing the children, of being left behind entirely? Was this about love or leverage? And if the custody battle was already slipping through her fingers, was Jason's death the only way to ensure she stayed connected to the kids and to the money? Jason's sister Tracy, who later became guardian to Jack and Sarah, testified that Jason had confided in her, that he feared what Molly might do if she felt she was losing control, that he didn't feel safe discussing things openly, that she would never let him take the kids without a fight. So, what kind of fight was she prepared to have? Cold Radio viewers often ask, why then? Why that night? The answer may lie in the narrowness of the window. Jason was set to leave just days later. His bags were reportedly packed. His intentions were clear. In that brief slice of time between decision and departure, Molly's world was collapsing. Her family, her role, her future. And in that same window, Jason died. Coincidence or choreography? Was this really self-defense or something more preemptive? Did Molly snap in a moment of desperation, or was that moment waiting for its chance? Because if it was about the children, if she saw Jason's departure as the end of everything she controlled, then one question chills the spine. Was killing him the only way she believed she could keep them? And here's where the mystery deepens. Even if the motive was fear of loss, the result was the exact opposite. She lost everything anyway. Jack and Sarah were taken in by Jason's family in Ireland. They cut ties with Molly. They testified against her. And in their words, clear, direct, uncoached, they revealed the one truth Molly couldn't rewrite. They saw through her now. This isn't just a story of finances. It's a story of power. Of someone who, faced with losing everything, may have chosen the one option that gave her control, even if only for a moment. Audience reactions have been visceral. One listener wrote, "It felt like she wanted custody at any cost, even if it meant there was no one left to fight her for it." And that comment lingers, because it doesn't just hint at motive, it suggests intent. Molly's behavior after Jason's death supports this pattern. The guardianship attempts, the legal filings, the crime scene cleanup, the orchestrated narrative. Each move, each step, carefully taken. This leads us to one of the most disturbing questions in the case. Was Jason Corbett killed not in a moment of fear, but as a solution? Because if so, it reframes everything. What do you think about these 5 mysterious elements? Which one lingers in your mind the most? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below before we dive into the collective analysis and explore the major theories behind these mysteries. And if you believe this video deserves to be seen, leave a like and hit subscribe to Cold Radio. That's how you help bring these cold cases one step closer to the light of truth. 5 details, 5 shadows, each unsettling on its own. But placed side by side, they form something far stranger. Not a timeline, but a pattern. And not just a pattern of behavior, but a blueprint of control. Let's walk back through the pieces. The vanished devices, never recovered. The crime scene, sterilized before the story could be told. The children's testimony, manipulated and reversed. A conviction, strong, clear, reduced to a footnote in a courtroom deal. And a motive, calculated, emotional, and worth $600,000. Alone, they're fragments. Together, they begin to whisper a different kind of story. Because when you step back from the courtroom, from the interviews, from the carefully worded defense, and look at these 5 moments as part of a single design, something emerges, something colder, something harder to explain away. We often ask, was this a crime of passion or of planning? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe this wasn't just about a moment of violence. Maybe it was about a long sequence of control. Control over the narrative. Control over the scene. Control over the children. Control over the outcome. Consider this. Molly Martens didn't just survive the crime. She actively reshaped what came after. She erased Jason's voice. She altered the physical evidence. She coached the only witnesses. She secured a release through legal technicality. And in the middle of it all, she stood to gain access to the 2 things Jason was preparing to take away: his children and the life insurance money. Now pause. Is that a coincidence or a convergence? Let's challenge each of the major theories. Theory 1. Molly and Thomas acted in self-defense. That Jason was abusive. That they were terrified. But if that were true, why delete his digital trail? Why sanitize the crime scene before forensics could finish? Why coach the children to lie if the truth was already on your side? Theory 2, that the killing wasn't planned but spontaneous, that Jason's decision to return to Ireland pushed emotions to the breaking point, that Molly snapped and Thomas followed instinct. It explains the emotion, but not the execution, because what followed wasn't chaotic, it was organized. Devices disappeared. A cleaning crew was called. Testimonies were rehearsed. That's not panic, that's preparation. And then, Theory 3, the darkest possibility, that Jason's death wasn't a reaction, it was a solution. That in the face of losing the children, the marriage, and the control, Molly and her father made a choice. And every step taken afterward, every wiped phone, every altered narrative, every legal maneuver wasn't about justice. It was about erasing resistance. It's a theory that chills, because if it's true, then this wasn't just about custody, it was about rewriting reality itself. Here's where things turn. Once the children spoke, once Jack and Sarah, in their own words, described manipulation, threats, fear, something shifted. Suddenly, the public lens flipped. Suddenly, the woman who once seemed protective felt performative. That's the haunting part. How quickly perception can turn when the truth, real, raw, unfiltered, finally breaks through. And still, the court reversed course. Still, Molly and Thomas walked free. Still, the contradiction between what was done and what was decided remains unresolved. So we ask, was this case about violence or about power? Was Jason silenced in his bedroom or in the courtroom? And when facts are rearranged and stories are polished and voices are manipulated, how do we even begin to locate truth? At Cold Radio, we don't claim to solve what the courts couldn't, but we do look at what was left behind, at the cracks, at the silence, at the questions still echoing beneath the surface. Because this case doesn't fade, it fractures, and the deeper you stare into it, the more the edges start to shift. So we turn the final question to you. What do you believe? Was Jason a threat or a target? Were Molly and Thomas victims or architects? Were those 5 strange details just chaos or something far more chilling? Join the investigation. Comment, debate, analyze, because sometimes justice isn't delivered in a single verdict. It lives in the minds that refuse to let go. Some cases end with a verdict, others with a silence that never truly leaves the room, and some, like this one, leave behind an echo, an ache, a story that's never quite allowed to rest. The death of Jason Corbett didn't just end a life, it shattered a family, it spanned oceans, and it left 2 children adrift, caught between memory and manipulation. Jack and Sarah were just 10 and 8. They lost their mother to illness, then their father to violence, and then, almost unthinkably, they were asked to lie about the one person they had left. That's not a story with a clean ending. It's a story with scars. Today, they live in Ireland, thousands of miles from the home where it all happened. They live with Tracy Lynch, their father's sister, and her husband David, the people who took them in, the people who helped them rebuild, not just a home, but an identity, an anchor in the wake of everything that was torn apart. It hasn't been easy, but it's been honest. Over the years, Jack and Sarah found something many never do. Their voice. They stood in court. They told their story again, this time on their terms. And in doing so, they gave Jason something no verdict, no legal deal, no courtroom transcript ever could. They gave him his truth. That's what lingers most about this case. Not just the crime, but its ripples. The way a single act of violence can distort the lives of so many. The way trust, once broken, leaves behind not just pain, but questions. The way the truth can be buried, not just by lies, but by silence. Because Jason Corbett wasn't a headline. He wasn't just a case. He was a father, a widower, a man who had already known loss and was trying to build something new from it. He worked in packaging. He loved books. He wrote children's stories. After his first wife, Mags, died of an asthma attack, Jason did what many would struggle to do. He carried on. He raised 2 children. He built a life for them. Quietly, without fanfare, with resolve. His life was not extraordinary. but it was meaningful. And that, perhaps, is what makes his death all the more cruel. Because it wasn't just brutal, it was personal, intimate, the kind of violence that doesn't just end a life, but erases a future. We may never know exactly what happened that night. Not fully. The missing devices, the altered scene, the rehearsed stories, the contradictions. Some of it is sealed forever, behind bloodstains that were scrubbed away and voices that were silenced before they could be heard. But what we do have is memory, witness, refusal. Refusal to let this case slip into the shadows. Refusal to let Jason become just another name on a docket. Refusal to let Jack and Sarah's truth be overwritten. Again. And maybe, just maybe, that refusal is a form of justice. A justice that doesn't wear a robe, doesn't sit behind a bench, but breathes in the act of remembering. So, tonight, as we close this story, we don't close the book, because some stories demand to be kept open. To be revisited, to be mourned. For Jack and Sarah, for Tracy and David, for those who continue to ask hard questions, and for Jason, whose voice was taken, but whose story still speaks. The echoes of the Jason Corbett case remain. Soft, haunting, undeniable. A reminder that truth, once lost, must be fought for. That justice isn't always loud, but it can still be heard. Here, if this video offered you a new perspective or made you pause and reflect, please hit like to help Cold Radio share this story with more people. What are your thoughts on this case? What part left you questioning the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because every perspective, every theory, could be a vital piece of the truth we're all trying to uncover. And don't forget to hit subscribe, so you won't miss any of the cases we'll be opening next. Thank you for joining us, listening, and lending your voice to Cold Radio's pursuit of the truth.